Okay, so today I wanted to have like a really easy chat, not too advanced, but about data architecture. And mostly I was going to use the example of something that we're all going to try to build out at one point or another on Bubble, which is a chat. And as far as I know, there are three ways of setting up your data architecture to build out a chat. And the easiest and maybe the most intuitive, or the one that we'll all start with, is to include the full list. And we're going to build that out. The next one would be to build out by conversation and then build out a unique thing called a message and then load each of those things inside a conversation, which is very similar to this but adds an extra layer of basically there's an extra depth to it because you can add pictures and texts and different other items. You can still add them here, but we're going to discuss that once we get around to it. And the third thing is inverse linking. And basically I wanted to make this because when I had first started on Bubble, I did read about this here, which is Josh's explanation of how Bubble runs through searches. And I wanted to basically make new users at least aware of it, the benefits of inverse linking versus direct linking. And maybe it's something that you won't understand right away, but if it's something that's at the back of your mind, you can come back and check out this video when you're a little bit more proficient. And for those of us who are trying to really tweak the performance of our larger apps, scalable apps, then we need to really have a deep understanding of this. So basically, we're going to run through them 1 through 3, and I'm going to explain the benefits of each at each basically milestone. So the first one we're looking at is to include a list, and that's the easiest way. You're going to have an input here, and we're going to click send, and we're going to add some text to a list. This is the most lightweight way to make it. So let's start with a conversation. Okay, let's create that. Now we have a thing called type conversation, and we need texts, so we're going to add texts. Now in this example, we're going to add a list of texts. So let's, I think that might have actually taken it off my screen. So let's go text, and let's make it a list. And now all of a sudden we have access to a bunch of conversations with a list of texts inside them. So let's go to app data, and we're going to have a user to generate stuff inside of a conversation, a list of texts. Let's make a new conversation, and let's just add a text called A. Let's create that. Now we have a conversation with one text in it, and what we're going to do is we're going to build this out to load. First of all, this is a repeating group. Let's find that conversation, do a search for conversation. Let's just grab the first item that comes up. First item, and then we're going to pull out all of its texts. Okay, so now the repeating group is going to pull each message as a text from the conversation. We're only pulling one conversation at a time, and we're going to pull its texts. Okay, so now when we load this, we should see A, but we also want to be able to add texts to the conversation. So let's do some workflows here, and let's go element actions, and let's go make changes to a thing. And we're just going to pull the first conversation, do a search for conversation, first item. Okay, and let's add a text, and let's make it input A's value. Okay, so now if I refresh this, I should be able to, what I did is create a conversation. That conversation, I'm preloading it, but you can easily pull up any conversation that you want. And then I'm pulling it lists of texts, and it's going to have a number of them. Let's check it out. Why is it not loading? It's only got one text. Let's add another. Let's add B, and let's add C. Okay, I don't know if that actually triggered. Let's go check it out. Data, no, it didn't trigger. And the other thing that I forgot to do before I loaded it is actually show the message. So let's put a text in here, and let's go insert current cells text. So now we should see actually A, because we're only loading one conversation. And then here, we're going to add a text called B, and it should create it and add it in a text called C. Alright, that's this one right here. The easiest way to create a list of messages, basically. Now, if you try to do this, you're going to run into some issues, okay? And this is the issue that I saw in real life. Basically, you have a list of texts. Now you need another list of things. Maybe you need a list of pictures or a list of users that generated this text, because if you're not just loading text in that conversation and you want to add things, you're going to be building multiple lists. So let's go to our data, and let's build another thing here in the conversation. We have a list of text. Now we want a list of users that sent the messages, okay? And instead of, we're going to represent the user with a picture, and we're going to say here, we're going to say image, and we're going to say, we're going to have to find a way to pull the user, and then we're going to make that user's image show up, right? So now all of a sudden we have lists of texts, but next we also have a list of users under the same conversation. Okay, so one way to pull them would be to say, okay, well if the user sent the text, then the user is going to have a thing here we're going to generate at the same time. So in send, we're going to also say users. Oops, I forgot to make it a list. How unfortunate. Users, user, and make it a list. Very important. And now we have two lists, a list of texts and a list of users standing side by side, and we're just going to add the user here every time we make a new message. Add current user. Okay? Now current user, the way that the data set up just has a name and a picture, because usually that's what's going to happen in messaging. We're going to have the user's picture, and then we're going to have the user's name, and then we're going to have the user's message, right? That's usually what happens. Or am I wrong? I don't know. Now we need to pull the user. But the problem is, we're loading a bunch of texts. So there's ways around this. You could say, okay, well, each index represents a message. So this first cell is number 1, this second cell is message number 2, this cell is number 3. And then we can sort of hack our way around it and say, okay, fine, let's go, let's find the conversation. So do a search for conversation and new conversation. And first item, I did put this in, which I did not want. So now we're basically loading the same conversation as we did for the repeating groups texts. So we got that conversation, the first one, and then we're going to say users, but which user? Well, now we're going to say it's this cell's user. So item number, current cell's index, and then we're going to load their picture into here. We're just going to copy this expression and also paste it into here. And instead of the picture, we're going to use the same user's name. Now this is an unfortunate workaround because we're running a bunch of searches. We're searching for the conversation, searching for the conversation, searching for the conversation. And a good way to go around that is to just group these elements into a group. And this group can have this group can have a type of content called conversation, and we can just search for it once, okay? And first item. And then instead of all these searches, we could actually just grab dynamic data. We can just grab group conversation, which is this group, grab the conversation, grab the users, and the item number will be the current cell's index again, and we're going to load their name. Okay, so that's another way to do it. And when we load this, we should be able to see the user who generated its picture, their name, and then the actual message here. The problem with this, although it's quite fast, is that things will fall out of sync because we're basically faking it. Now we didn't have user, but we did have a message, so we don't actually have a user at that number. But if we create a new message, for real this time, basically it'll add a user. The problem is we have two lists. Okay, so now it's adding the message and it's adding the user. Now we have two lists, the message list and then the user list. And since we didn't have an actual user when we generated this, it fell out of sync. If we have a list of texts here and a list of users, which looks exactly the same, well, we already had text 1, 2, and 3, and we just generated user 1, which should be associated to 4. Okay, so things will fall out of sync really fast if you use this include list. It could be just a single error in the back where one of your users didn't load in on one of your messages, and all of a sudden everything is, out of sync by 1. So then your user who sent this message will appear here. So it's just not a very robust way of building out your data architecture. So now we're going to move on to the second one to fight this problem. Okay, so the second one is you create a message thing and you load the list of messages in the conversation, and then each message will have a picture and a text. Okay, so this is a more robust way of generating your conversation. Let's go here and let's go to somebody's here. That's cool. First time I see that. Somebody's watching my other videos. Okay, so the button send. Okay, we're going to want to change this around. We don't want to change our data structure around. So right now we have a conversation which has a list of text and a list of users. We're going to get rid of that. We're going to create a new thing called a message. And in this message, we're going to transfer what we had first. And we're going to have a single text and a single user. And now these guys will always stay in sync. There's no way they can fall out of sync because they're part of the same little thing. And this thing will actually load it into the conversation. So let's say messages, and this is plural because we're going to grab our message and we're going to say we have multiple ones per conversation. And all of a sudden, our conversation becomes an aggregate of all the messages that we decide to link to it, just like we see in this picture. So now we're going to create a message, we're going to link it to conversation's list of messages, and then we're going to be able to regenerate this list right here. Okay, so let's go to app data. We still have a conversation, but this field is deleted, and we're going to add messages instead of adding two lists, one for texts, one for users. I hope that makes sense so far. So let's build it out into our button here. Let's go start edit workflow, make changes to conversation. First, we have to actually create a message. So let's go message, and let's say text is the inputs value, and then your user will be your current user who generated this message. Okay, and we don't actually need this. We can actually just use creator, which I didn't think of, but whatever. So we have a user, and this user is going to have a picture and a name, and then the actual text that they put in. So let's change the messages for the conversation that we have, and we're just looking for the first one still. Although this will break later, so we're going to say group conversations conversation, so we can change between conversations later. I'm going to say add result of step 1. So now I'll create a message and add it to the conversation. Very, very simple setup. Ready to go. I hope I'm running as a user here. So these should not be here anymore. Right. We forgot to change the repeating group. So we're no longer loading texts now, we're loading multiple messages. And what we're going to do, we're going to grab group conversations conversation, and then we're going to load all of the messages in here. Okay, so let's do that. At first there shouldn't be any. It should appear blank, and then we should be able to create one. Alright, but I forgot to change the fields. That's something we have to do. So this is a message. This should no longer be a picture. This should be current sales message is user's picture. This should be current sales message is user's name. And this should be current sales message text. So now you'll notice we can pull a number of things, and we can add as many different fields as we need to here. We can add attachments, which are files, we can add pictures, we can add anything we want to the messages, and all we need to do with them is store them in the message. And then from the message, we can store them in the conversation. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. So we have a conversation list of message. We're going to generate a message now, and we're going to say now and send it. So now our user generated a message which contains his or her picture, mountain, their name, which is 1, and the text, which is now. And if we say now 2, it'll do the same thing over and over again, and now you have a way to build out a more robust conversation here with multiple different fields per message. Okay? Now this is the fastest way when you have short lists. And this is what I was talking about in the performance Q&A guide. If you go and read this at 23, message 23, Josh explains that, and Josh is a co-founder, so I think we can take his word for it. If your list is short, so 20 to 30 things per other thing, so in our case it's messages per conversation, in this case it's invoice per company, then yes, using a list will load faster. However, if you start scaling and the number of invoices goes beyond what you need to show, then it's going to load slower. So that's why you divorce the conversation from the message and you pull the messages by conversation instead. And that's the new thing, inverse linking. Okay? Direct linking is what we did so far, conversation, list of message, and then you build out your lists like that. And now we're going to divorce them and look for the messages through their conversation. Okay? So what we have to do is go back into our data tab, and we have to go into our data types. In conversation, we're going to remove the list of messages. We don't need that anymore. But we have a conversation for every message. And here, we're going to store it in the message itself and search for it. It's reverse linking or divorcing and conversation. So we'll have a single conversation per message. And when we generate a message, we'll add that conversation to the message. Okay? So here's our first conversation. We're still pulling only one, and I'm going to basically, when I generate the message, I'm going to generate it just the same way as before, but instead of adding it to the conversation, we're going to add the conversation to it. I hope that makes sense. And then we're going to say group conversations conversation, and then we're going to generate this message. And it's much simpler right now, but now instead of searching for instead of loading the list from the conversation, we're going to actually search for all of the messages whose conversation is parent groups, so this group's conversation. Okay? So I hope that makes sense so far, and it should be relatively easy for us to generate a new message and pull it in here. So right now, we have messages. You won't see them, right? Because we have messages. We have two of them, now one and now two. And we won't see them because they don't actually have a conversation that they're linked to. So they're just kind of floating in our database. But when we generate a new one, we're going to call this divorced one. And it's going to show up because this one here, if we refresh this, I believe if we refresh this, yes, now we have a conversation ID, you'll notice here. And what the database is doing is it's going to look through all of the messages. It's only going to pull the ones that match the conversation that we have in here. Okay? Divorced 2, let's send that, and divorced 3. Okay? And just to wrap things up, we're going to make various conversations, and then we're going to pull the messages that appear here. Okay? So let's go to design, and let's go to group, and we're basically going to load 3 conversations, and they're going to have different IDs. So let's go, oops, okay, let's just make one. It's not going to be wide enough, so I'm going to recopy them after. Now this groups thing type is a conversation. We're going to do a search for conversation first item, and then we're going to load that conversation's unique ID, just so we can see that it exists. And then we're going to go here and say parent group's conversation unique ID, yes, but we're going to look for item number 2. Then we're going to go create item number 2 because we only have one conversation right now. We're going to go new entry and create it. There it is. And then we're going to, basically when we click on this group, we're going to load that conversation, display data, into group conversation. It's the one with the repeating group, so this one here. And we're going to load this group's conversation. We're just going to copy this, oops, and we're going to paste it in here. Now when I click on this, basically on this this group's conversation, when I click on these buttons, which are white, so that wasn't very clever of me, but they basically pull a different conversation, each of them. And then Bubble's database will look through this one, and then we'll look through all messages for this conversation. So let's go convo2, create a message, convo2.1 and convo2.2. Now we just created 3 new messages that are linked to this conversation, and if we click on this one, we'll load these ones. See? Easy as that. And just a little explanation again, this is the fastest, but it's not the most robust because you won't always get matching if you're just pulling multiple lists based on their index. This is more robust and a little bit slower than this actually, but it is faster than this if you have very few items. So up to 20 or 30 says Josh. And this would be the most scalable. And in my testing, I haven't really found much of a speed difference. Even, you know, I can't say that I've thoroughly tested, so maybe I won't be talking too much in depth about this, but I'm in the process of changing all of I used to build like this, and now I'm in the process of changing everything over to this, because Bubble does get slower over time as your database grows, and I just want the most blazing fast usage of Bubble as I can get. And so I'm starting to build like this. And I just thought I would share this with all of you so that you can think about it as you're building out your data architectures and revisit it as you've built out a few apps and basically get faster at them. Okay? So yeah, I hope this was useful, and we'll catch you in the next